If you've ever stood on the edge of a celebration and felt like the outsider in your own family, you'll understand exactly how I felt that day. My father, George, was in his element, retired marine logistics officer, a man who wore the ghost of his rank like a second skin, always craving the respect and attention he believed he'd earned decades ago. At my sister Julia's wedding, he'd found his perfect stage, the grand ballroom of the Pacific Crown Hotel in downtown San Diego, right next to a champagne fountain bubbling like the laughter of people who didn't know better. The sun was setting outside, painting Coronado Bay in gold, but inside it was all crystal, white tablecloths, and forced smiles. I stood by the gift table, a stack of pastel envelopes and a pile of presents between me and the rest of my family. My bridesmaid dress was a muted lavender, chosen by my sister, of course, and it felt as stiff and uncomfortable as my role in this entire affair. I should have known my father would seize the moment for a performance. He never missed an audience, and tonight his fans were a half-circle of his old business contacts, men and women from the defense industry who still called him a Colonel E out of habit, not obligation. He was holding court, his wine glass flashing in the chandelier light, and suddenly I realized he was talking about me. I caught the tail end of the joke, but it was enough. "Ignore her," he said, voice loud enough to carry over the soft jazz and gentle clinking of silverware. "She's just army trash. Probably going to sneak out early for some secret mission in the parking lot." The men laughed, thin, sycophantic, not really amused but eager to please. The women gave each other sidelong glances, the kind you learn in childhood, equal parts pity and amusement. That moment could have shattered me. And, honestly, once upon a time it would have. But military service teaches you to stand steady in the face of incoming fire, especially when it comes from your own family. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, but before I could retreat, a new voice cut through the noise. Clear, sharp, like the crack of a parade rifle. "Sir!" The entire group froze. Lieutenant Alex Miller, my soon-to-be brother-in-law, stood just a few feet away, immaculate in his navy blue dress uniform, his medals catching the light. His back was straight, posture perfect, but his eyes weren't on my father. They were fixed on me, steady and unwavering. He spoke again, this time louder. "Sir, with all due respect, that trash is my commanding officer." The room went silent. You could almost hear the waves on the shore outside. My father's face, always so quick to recover, faltered. His smile faded, confusion clouding his features. I realized I was holding my breath. I could feel every pair of eyes swinging between me, my father, and Alex. Even Julia, the bride herself, was watching from across the room, her mouth open in shock. But here's the thing, that moment of vindication, that flash of public justice, didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of 1,000 little slights, countless private wounds and snide comments. My father and I had been locked in a Cold War for years, a battle between his idea of who I should be and the reality I'd chosen for myself. Less than an hour before the toast, he'd pulled me aside during cocktail hour, yanking me away from Julia's frantic last-minute veil adjustments. "Sam," he'd said, he'd always refused to call me Samantha or Major Williams. "I still don't understand why you turned down that Pentagon job I lined up for you. I could have you behind a desk in DC, not wasting your time out in Colorado, chasing phantoms on a base no one cares about. You should have worn your uniform today, at least pretend to respect the family." I'd learned not to react. Years of military protocol had taught me to keep my face neutral, my words measured, my emotions locked down tighter than any government vault. What he didn't realize, what he never cared to ask, was that Alex and his father, Yes, that Mr. Miller, the cybersecurity contractor whose company worked with my unit, was standing just close enough to overhear everything. My dad, completely oblivious, had clapped Mr. Miller on the back and made the army trash a joke as if it were nothing, just another casual cruelty. But tonight, he'd crossed a line he didn't even know existed. Standing there by the gift table, heart pounding, I looked at Alex and felt a wave of gratitude stronger than anything I'd ever felt for him before. He hadn't offended me because I was his fiancée's sister. He'd spoken up because, in his world, our world, respect and protocol weren't optional. They were everything. I knew, right then, the wedding was going to change everything. Maybe not for my father. But for me, it was the first real sign that I didn't have to be the family scapegoat forever. I just had to be brave enough to keep standing tall, no matter who was watching. The wedding reception moved on, as they always do. Laughter swelled, plates clattered, and the DJ tried to coax Julia's college friends onto the dance floor with throwback pop hits. But for me, everything had shifted. Alex's words echoed in my mind, but so did the sting of my father's public dismissal. If I was being honest, it wasn't the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. I slipped out onto the balcony overlooking the city. San Diego was spread out below, a quilt of lights, palm trees, and the steady hum of traffic. I let myself breathe, finally, as the cool evening air wrapped around my bare shoulders. It was strange, no matter how much rank I earned, no matter what new medals glimmered on my dress uniform, I was always just the odd one heir to my family. Not the golden child, Julia, whose every decision seemed to make Mom and Dad beam. Not the smart-mouthed, charming brother, Brian, who'd somehow managed to build a tech startup in Austin and call it his side hustle. No, I was the one who didn't fit the mold. Too serious, too ambitious, too other. But outside the walls of my childhood home, I was someone else entirely. Major Samantha Williams. The woman who commanded respect, who made decisions that affected national security, who'd earned the trust of people who had no reason to care about my family name. I'd learned, slowly, to live in these two worlds, the private one, filled with family judgment and disappointment, and the public one, built on purpose, protocol, and the kind of pressure that only made me sharper. Sometimes, the boundary between those worlds was razor thin. A few months back, at Christmas, the contrast had felt almost cruel. The house was filled with pine needles and the smell of roasting turkey. Julia made her big engagement announcement in the middle of dinner. Dad nearly jumped out of his seat in joy, toasting on my beautiful daughter, finally marrying a real officer. His meaning wasn't lost on anyone. My achievements were just the awkward footnotes, mentioned quietly in the kitchen, if at all. Later that night, after the laughter faded, I tried to share my own news. I'd been chosen for battalion command, a rare honor. I'd waited until Dad was alone by the fire, hoping for just a flicker of recognition. "That's nice, Sam," he said, barely glancing away from the flames. "But try not to get stuck in some dusty corner of the army. Not much future in that." Mom drifted in, offering her usual gentle smile and even gentler advice. "We just want you to be happy, honey. Maybe take a break, do something normal for once." I remember staring into the fire, feeling the familiar ache of wanting to be seen, not just as a daughter or a soldier, but as myself. That ache never lasted long, though. Duty had a way of pushing everything else aside. Just a few days after Christmas, I was back at Fort Carson, sitting in a secure facility, a cold, windowless room filled with the low hum of servers and the blue glow of monitors. That night, The world outside faded into insignificance. My team was in the middle of a critical cyber defense operation. A hostile actor was targeting the grid across several states, and every decision I made had consequences. I remember the way my voice changed in those moments. Calm, certain, never a trace of the girl who doubted herself at the family table. Lock down sectors Bravo and Delta. Cut their access. Then reroute our countermeasures. Captain Kinney, you're with me. There was no hesitation from my team. They didn't care about my family drama or my awkward Christmases. They trusted me because I'd proven, again and again, that I could be trusted. That my authority didn't come from a name, but from grit, clarity, and the ability to stand tall when things got hard. That was my real home. My real family. But it's never that simple, is it? No matter how many walls you build, the old wounds have a way of finding their way through. Back at the wedding, the night wore on. Julia and Alex had their first dance, and my parents circled the room like celebrities, basking in borrowed glory. I found myself sitting at the edge of the dance floor, swirling the last of my champagne and watching the crowd through tired eyes. Mom sat down beside me, the scent of her lavender perfume blending with the soft candlelight. "Are you all right, Sam?" she asked, gentle concern in her voice. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a long day." She squeezed my hand. "You know your father doesn't mean half of what he says. He misses the old days, the tradition. You and Julia, so different, but we love you both. He just doesn't always know how to show it." I smiled, though it felt like work. "I know, Mom." She nodded, but her eyes were sad. Maybe she did understand, just a little. Maybe she saw more than she let on. Still, as I watched Dad throw his arm around Alex, introducing him to his old Marine buddies as the future of our family, I felt the distance between us stretch, wider than the whole city. But as the night drew to a close, I looked at Alex, my brother-in-law now, and caught the small, respectful nod he gave me from across the room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but it was real. In that moment, I realized I didn't need my father's approval to know my worth. I just needed to keep being the woman I'd become, no matter what world I was standing in. Returning to Colorado after the wedding, I fell back into my military life with the kind of relief only a soldier could understand. At Fort Carson, everything made sense. The world was orderly, decisions mattered, and the lines between respect and authority were clear. No one here cared about my family's opinions or the old battles fought at home. They cared about results. The morning after my red-eye flight, I walked through the base just as dawn broke, the sky pink over the Rockies. Soldiers saluted as I passed. Some nodded, others offered a quick morning. Their recognition was simple, rooted in our shared experience and my hard-earned reputation. Inside our operations center, a fortress of screens, secure phones, and whiteboards filled with code, I was back in my element. My XO, Captain Miller, was already there, coffee in hand and eyes focused. "Welcome back, Major," he said, a hint of a smile. "How was California?" "Sunny. Loud. Too many speeches," I replied. "Any news?" He handed me a folder. "We picked up some unusual traffic last night. Nothing urgent, but our friends at Cyber Command want a look." I sank into my chair, already scanning the report. Here, my opinions were sought out, my voice respected, my calm under pressure a source of confidence for my team. It always struck me how invisible my real life was to my parents. To them, my work was just a series of mysterious e-computer projects. To my father, especially, it was never real soldiering. If it didn't involve boots in the mud and medals earned under gunfire, it hardly counted. And yet, the world we were defending, the world of silent battles fought in code, was becoming more critical every year. Just after noon, an alarm blared through the center. Instantly, my team snapped to readiness. The air was electric, but our movements were efficient, practiced. Status? I called out. Lieutenant Evans spun his monitor. We've detected a breach attempt. East Coast Energy Infrastructure. Looks like a foreign state actor. Get me the NSA task force on the line. Initiate lockdown on all affected nodes. McKinney, launch our countermeasures and start tracing the origin. I felt the adrenaline surge, but my training took over. This was my battlefield, one where decisions came down to seconds and hesitation meant disaster. While my family still saw me as the serious one, and my soldiers knew a different version of me. I was their shield and strategist, the one who'd pulled all-nighters during cyber exercises, who remembered birthdays and listened to worries about deployments and promotions. The army was hard, sometimes cruel, but it was also fair. Here, your actions defined you. Hours later, when the breach was contained and the threat neutralized, I let myself breathe. Miller brought over another coffee, his respect quiet but palpable. Solid work today, Major. You always know how to keep your head when things get rough. I nodded. That's the job. He grinned. Does your family even know what you do? I mean, really know? I shook my head, half smiling. They know I work with computers. I think my dad still believes I just fix printers. Miller laughed. Their loss. That night, I called my mom, just to check in. She answered on the third ring, her voice already tired. How's my favorite daughter? She asked, her standard opening, though I'd always suspected she said the same to Julia. I'm good, Mom. Busy. Just had a long day. She sighed, as if steeling herself. Your father's been talking about you. He worries, you know. He thinks you're so far away from everything. Family, tradition, the real army. There it was again, the old belief that my world was somehow less real, less valuable than the one he'd lived in. I tried to keep my voice even. Mom, the army's changed. We're not just marching in parades anymore. What I do matters. Even if he doesn't see it. She was quiet for a moment. I know, honey. He misses when things were simpler. Try not to be too hard on him. I understood. Mom had always been the peacekeeper, trying to smooth over every rough edge. But peace often meant pretending everything was fine, pretending I wasn't the odd one out, pretending I didn't notice the slights. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights. Sometimes I envied my sister's easy confidence, her ability to glide through family gatherings without a care. But I also knew, deep down, I wouldn't trade my life for hers. The next morning, I met Alex for breakfast at a diner outside base. He was already there when I arrived, out of uniform, looking every bit the relaxed, supportive brother-in-law. You handled yourself well at the wedding, he said, pushing a mug of coffee toward me. Not many people could keep their cool like that. I shrugged. Comes with the territory. He grinned. You know, your dad will never admit it, but you've got more command presence than half the officers I've met. Not sure he'd agree, I said wryly. Alex leaned in. Doesn't matter. You're respected by the people who matter. Including me. That simple acknowledgement warmed something inside me I didn't know was cold. On my way back to base, I found myself thinking about legacy. My father believed it was built on stories and medals and the kind of glory that faded with time. But I was starting to see legacy as something else entirely, built on trust, service, and the silent respect of those who followed you into battle, even if that battle was fought with code and not bullets. The army taught me to fight for the people who stood beside me. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop fighting for a family's approval I'd never earn, and start living for the one I'd chosen. The holidays always have a way of exposing the cracks in a family's foundation. For us, Christmas was both a celebration and a battlefield, a place where old resentments mingled with pine needles and the smell of cinnamon rolls. That year, Julia's engagement was the centerpiece of every conversation. Mom had outdone herself with decorations. The house sparkled with tiny white lights, and the tree was so perfectly trimmed it could have graced a magazine cover. Dad, in his favorite marine core sweater, held court by the fireplace, beaming every time someone mentioned the wedding. It should have felt like home, but it never did. I spent most of the evening helping Julia with her endless Pinterest-inspired plans. Refilling drinks for my uncles, and trying to dodge Dad's running commentary. Then came the toast, one of those moments you know you'll remember for all the wrong reasons. To Julia and Alex, a dad announced, raising his glass, for showing us what real ambition looks like, a marriage of honor, service, and promise. Our family's future is in good hands. Everyone applauded, but the subtext hung in the air. It was a pointed reminder of my own single status, my unconventional and military career. I felt my cheeks flush but forced a smile, clinking glasses with Julia, who, to her credit, looked a little embarrassed. Later, as the house grew quiet and guests slipped away into the snowy night, I caught Dad by the fire. I'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him the news. I'd just been selected for battalion command, a position only a handful of majors ever get. My heart thudded with nerves as I spoke. Dad, I wanted to let you know. I'm getting my own battalion. He didn't look up from his phone. That's nice, Sam. But just make sure you don't get stuck out there forever. Places like that can swallow you up. It's not a great place to meet anyone, you know. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but the ache was too deep. Mom, always the mediator, came over and rubbed my back. She's right, honey, as she whispered. We just want you to be happy. You know, normal. Normal. For years, that word felt like an accusation. As if my ambition was a flaw to be corrected, not a strength to be celebrated. The other life. Contrast that with my reality. Just a few days later, I was back in Colorado, in the dim glow of my unit's command center. There, and normally had nothing to do with relationships or traditions. Normally was reading threat reports over cold coffee at 3 a.m., troubleshooting digital attacks, and making decisions that didn't just change my life, but sometimes changed the safety of entire cities. That particular week, we intercepted a serious breach attempt. I remember it vividly. A junior NCO rushed in, voice tight with urgency. We've got an active incursion. Looks state-sponsored. They're probing the Western power grid. There was no time for doubt, no room for nostalgia. I switched to command mode. Lock down all affected systems. Run our countermeasures. Evans, get me NSA and Homeland on a secure channel. The team snapped into action, because in that world, my authority was unquestioned. My skills were respected, not dismissed. Captain Miller, my right hand, used to joke, "A Major Williams leads with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. That's why she always gets results." He saw the real me, the commander whose power came from listening, thinking, acting, never from yelling. In that environment, I thrived. I didn't have to apologize for being smart, decisive, or, yes, a little intense. My other family, the army, valued exactly what my parents could never understand. An unexpected ally. A few days after the wedding, my phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Just wanted to say, what you do matters. If you ever need backup or a terrible wedding joke, I'm here. I grinned at my phone. Sometimes, the best family isn't the one you're born into, but the one that finds you along the way. A decision is made. As January rolled into February, I felt something shift inside me. The wedding incident had been the last straw. Years of quiet endurance and internalizing pain had made me resilient, but it was time to stop playing defense. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want an apology. I wanted recognition, not for the rank or the ribbons, but for the person I'd become. I knew I wouldn't get it from Dad, but I could claim it for myself. When the Army announced the date for our base's annual Family Day and Award ceremony, a big, public event, I realized this was my opportunity. It would be my stage, my territory, and I could set the rules. I started planning in earnest. Every detail mattered: who was invited, where they'd sit, how the program would unfold. For once, I had the power to design the narrative. I sent Dad a formal invitation, addressed to a Mr. George Williams, USMC, Ret, is subtly reminding him he was now a civilian guest, not the one running the show. Next, I made sure our brigade commander, a sharp, thoughtful colonel who respected my work, would be the keynote speaker and presenter of awards. I even personally drafted Alex's commendation, highlighting his integrity and professionalism on and off duty. No more shrinking. No more being the family footnote. This time, I was going to take up space. And I wasn't going to apologize for it. If there's one thing the Army teaches you, besides how to sleep anywhere and the merits of strong coffee, it's how to plan. So when I set out to organize our annual Family Day and Award ceremony, I treated it not as a party, but as an operation. The weeks leading up to the event were a blur of logistics. I oversaw everything: seating charts, invitations, the script for each speech. Every detail mattered. This was my world, my command, and, maybe for the first time, my family would be forced to see it with clear eyes. I made sure Dad's invitation sounded suitably grand, but left no doubt who was in charge. Instead of a Dad, he received an envelope marked a Mr. George Williams, USMC, Ret. That a Ret, it was more important than it looked, a subtle, respectful reminder that, in this room, he was a guest, not the ranking officer. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist. Sure enough, Mom called a week later, her voice excited. "Your father is so proud. He says your unit is finally recognizing his service. He's telling all his friends he's sitting in the front row." I smiled at the phone, half amused, half exasperated. He still believed every stage belonged to him. But this time, the stage was mine. I requested Colonel Avery, my brigade commander, a quiet academic with a razor-sharp mind, to be our guest of honor. His presence gave the ceremony the kind of gravity Dad respected, and his private knowledge of my unit's recent cyber operations added weight. I asked him to present all awards, including Alex's and my own. On the day before the event, I walked through the base auditorium, feeling the heavy anticipation that always comes before a mission. I checked every detail: American flags perfectly draped, rows of chairs set in straight lines, the scent of floor polish and pressed uniforms filling the air. I wanted nothing left to chance. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying old arguments in my head: Dad's dismissive tone, Mom's well-meaning but misguided concern, all the moments I'd been minimized or ignored. But underneath the nerves, I felt a new sense of clarity. I wasn't the same woman who had come home from boot camp years ago, hungry for a single word of praise. I didn't need it anymore. Showtime. The morning of Family Day, I woke up before my alarm. I pulled on my dress blues, checked every button and ribbon, made sure my hair was perfectly pinned. My reflection in the mirror was sharp, clear-eyed, and ready. The auditorium filled quickly. My soldiers, men and women of every background, every skill set, filed in and took their seats with perfect posture. The room buzzed with quiet excitement, and a kind of reverent silence settled over the space. Mom and Dad arrived with Julia and Alex. I watched them from backstage, noting the way Dad straightened his tie, nodding to soldiers around him with the same condescending, benevolent smile he always wore at family events. He patted the empty chair beside him, acting as if he were a dignitary about to be honored. But here, he was a civilian, a guest in a house governed by my authority. My nerves evaporated as I walked onto the stage. The echo of my footsteps, the sea of attentive faces, the weight of the flags behind me, all of it reminded me, this is my world. I began my opening remarks, voice even and measured, addressing not just the families, but especially my soldiers. Service takes many forms. Not all battles are fought on the front lines. Some are waged in silence, in rooms like this one, with eyes on screens, minds sharp and ready. Today, we celebrate victories that rarely make the headlines, but change everything for those who fight them. From the corner of my eye, I saw Dad's proud expression shift, just a shade. Maybe confusion, maybe curiosity. I introduced Colonel Avery, who spoke with understated authority, praising the unit's successes in defending the nation's most sensitive infrastructure. Then came the awards. First, Alex. Colonel Avery read his citation, praising his professionalism, his integrity, his unwavering respect for command. There was a deliberate pause as the colonel's eyes drifted toward the front row. The meaning was clear. Dad's jaw tightened, his hands clenching and unclenching on his knees. Finally, it was my turn. Colonel Avery's words rang out in the silent auditorium. It is my privilege to present the Legion of Merit for outstanding leadership and the successful execution of Operation Night Watch, a mission that protected our nation from a catastrophic cyber attack. The planning and execution of this operation rested solely on the shoulders of its commander. Major Samantha Williams, please come forward. The room erupted. Soldiers stood at attention, their respect thunderous and genuine. The moment of truth. I walked to the stage, each step deliberate, and saluted the colonel. As he pinned the medal to my chest, I looked out, past him, past the flags, and finally met my father's eyes. He looked small. For the first time, I saw not the legend, not the storyteller or the critic, but just a man. One who suddenly realized that the narrative he built didn't fit the world around him anymore. The applause faded. Protocol dictated that everyone in uniform stand in respect for the recipient of the Legion of Merit. Dad rose, half a second too late, pulled to his feet by rules he could not break. He wasn't standing for his daughter. He was standing for a major receiving the Legion of Merit from a colonel. And for once, he wasn't the center of the story. He was just an accessory, a spectator in someone else's victory. I took a breath, holding onto that feeling, not triumph, not revenge, but something softer. Relief. Release. A closing of an old account. After the ceremony, the base auditorium slowly emptied, but the energy in the air lingered like electricity after a storm. My soldiers, friends, and colleagues gathered for the reception in the officers' club next door. Plates of barbecue and potato salad appeared, music played softly, and laughter bubbled up from every corner. I found myself surrounded by my real tribe, people who had sweated beside me during impossible nights, who knew how hard won every success really was. Sergeant Cruz, a career NCO with a dry sense of humor, clapped me on the back hard enough to make me stagger. "Hell of a job, he said, shaking my hand with real pride. "Couldn't have done it without you all," I replied, and meant it. Lieutenant Evans, barely a year out of Rock, beamed at me. "I didn't know what leadership really looked like until I served in your unit." "Thank you." Each handshake, each genuine smile, was a salve to old wounds. For so long, I tried to win over my family, never realizing that I already had everything I'd ever needed right here. Across the room, I caught a glimpse of my parents. Mum stood awkwardly by the buffet, picking at a plate, looking around as if she didn't recognize anyone. Dad hovered beside her, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on the floor. They looked strangely small and alone, ghosts at a party where they once would have been the center of attention. Julia and Alex came over, Alex still in uniform, Julia practically floating with pride. "Samantha, that was incredible," as she said, hugging me tightly. Alex just smiled and saluted me, but his eyes shone. "You've always had my respect." Today, I think everyone else finally understands why. I hugged them both, feeling the last bit of old resentment dissolve. If my family couldn't see me, that was their loss. The people who mattered, my team, my new family, were right here. A moment of reflection. I slipped out onto the balcony for some air, letting the cold wind sting my cheeks. For a moment, I let myself feel the weight of the last few years. All the times I'd swallowed my words at family dinners, the hours spent wishing for approval that never came, the holidays spent alone on base because someone had to be there. All of it felt lighter now, like a pack finally set down after a long march. My phone buzzed. A message from Captain Miller. You set the bar today. Proud to serve with you." I texted back, smiling to myself. Wouldn't trade this team for anything. Back inside, the night wore on. My parents lingered near the exit. Mum came over and hugged me, her arms tighter than usual. "We're proud of you, honey," she said. But her eyes were watery, her voice thin. Dad didn't say much. He managed to quiet a "well done, Major," and shook my hand, formally, as if I were a stranger or a dignitary. Then he and Mum left, almost unnoticed. The party goes on. The celebration continued without them. Officers and soldiers mingled with their families, swapping stories about field exercises and deployments, laughing about near misses and inside jokes. I felt a belonging I'd rarely known outside of my unit. Near midnight, as the room thinned out, Colonel Avery came by, drink in hand. "You did more than command an operation today, Williams," he said, quietly enough that only I could hear. "You commanded respect from everyone who matters." I nodded, gratitude swelling in my chest. "Thank you, sir. I hope my family finally saw a little of what we do." He smiled, that knowing way all seasoned officers do. "Maybe. Or maybe it's enough that you did." A new kind of peace. That night, back in my on-base apartment, I sat in silence, staring at the Legion of Merit still pinned to my dress uniform. I felt calm. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just calm. The old need to prove myself to my family had faded, replaced by something steadier. I thought of all the soldiers who had trusted me, all the young officers who'd chosen to stay in the army because they'd found a leader who saw them for who they were. That, I realized, was a legacy that mattered. The next morning, I called my mother, not out of obligation, but to tell her I was okay. She answered, voice gentle. "We didn't know, Samantha. We never really saw all this. We still love you. I hope you know that." "I do, Mom," I said, and for once, it was true. "I'm where I belong." We hung up, and I got ready for another day. The army rolled on, the mission continued, and I was no longer the girl desperate for recognition. I was a leader, and I was at peace with who I'd become. Time moves differently in the army. Months can feel like years, especially after a life-changing moment. The weeks after the award ceremony passed in a blur of mission planning, paperwork, and the familiar routines of base life. The medal from Colonel Avery found a place on my office shelf, next to photos of my team, not my family. It was a reminder of what mattered most. Rumors began circulating about promotions. I'd heard my name mentioned for months, but army rumors are like the wind, everywhere, but impossible to pin down. When the official email came, I almost missed it. "Congratulations, LTC Williams. You are hereby assigned to the Cyber Command headquarters in Washington, D.C." I stared at the screen, trying to absorb what it meant. Not just a promotion, Lieutenant Colonel, but a move to the nerve center of military cyber operations. It was the kind of assignment people spent whole careers chasing. For a moment, I let myself feel pride, unfiltered, unburdened. That night, I took a quiet walk through the now familiar base, letting the cool Colorado air fill my lungs. I passed the parade field, the gym, the chow hall where I'd celebrated more than one lonely Thanksgiving. I paused at the flagpole, the stars above as sharp and clear as the sense of closure I felt. I thought about Dad, about Julia and Alex, about all the years I tried to fit myself into someone else's mold. I wasn't angry anymore. The ceremony hadn't affixed anything, but it had changed the narrative. For once, my family had seen me as I was, a leader in my own right. And now, I was moving forward. A last goodbye. My last day at Fort Carson was bittersweet. There was no big send-off, just a small formation on the parade ground. My closest soldiers and friends gathered to say goodbye. Captain Miller, ever the pragmatist, handed me a plaque that read, "A for leadership under fire, both seen and unseen." I hugged him, surprising us both. "Keep this place running, Miller." and take care of Evans and Cruz." He smiled. "We'll do you proud, Don't forget us when you're running the show in DC." I loaded the last of my boxes into my Jeep, paused for a moment, and let the memories settle. I knew I'd miss this place, the wild storms, the early mornings, the camaraderie forged in sleepless nights and close calls. As I drove away, I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I was certain the best was yet to come. Washington, D.C., new battles, new belonging. The Pentagon isn't glamorous, not in the way movies pretend. The walls are thick, the light artificial, and the hum of data centers constant. But here, nobody cared about my name, my childhood, or who my family thought I should be. Here, all that mattered was the mission. My new office had no windows, but the walls were lined with massive screens displaying global threat matrices, lines of code, news feeds, and a map of cyber incidents around the world. My team was a mix of civilian tech prodigies, seasoned officers, and NSA specialists who spoke in code as easily as English. The work was intense. We countered digital attacks from adversaries I'd only read about, participated in briefings with generals and senior policymakers, and played a daily chess match against the most sophisticated threats the world could throw at us. I missed the old rhythms, the early morning PT runs, the clang of weights in the gym, the easy laughter in the chow hall, but I found new rhythms, new challenges, and, gradually, a new tribe. For the first time, my double life felt whole. Nobody cared about a normal. They cared about competence, integrity, and the ability to keep a cool head when the world was spinning. The family you choose. With distance, my relationship with my parents changed. Calls became less frequent, more civil. There were fewer arguments, fewer questions about us settling down. Instead, we talked about the weather, about Julia's kids, about Dad's garden. He never quite apologized, but the tension had faded into something like respect, or at least, acceptance. The army gave me a family, too, one forged by choice, not by birth. There was Captain Miller, now the XO of my old battalion. Evans, who'd been promoted and was training new cyber warriors. Cruz, who'd just retired after 25 years and sent me a photo of his fishing boat with the plaque I'd given him hanging on the cabin wall. They kept in touch. Emails and messages came in every month. Updates, requests for advice, funny stories about base life. Every one of them made me prouder than anything I'd ever received from my own family. An unexpected email. One evening, working late on a classified report, my secure inbox pinged. The subject line was simple: congratulations. The sender, George Williams. The email was short, almost awkward. Saw your promotion in the Army Times. Looks like you found your path. Your mother says hello. Dad. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even praise. But it was a recognition, a small olive branch, perhaps, from a man who'd finally realized his daughter had made it, even if he'd never fully understand how. I smiled, closed the email, and archived it. I no longer needed his approval to measure my worth. Letting go. Promotion ceremonies are strange, part celebration, part goodbye. As I stood in my new uniform, silver oak leaf pinned to my shoulder, I looked out at my team and realized something profound. I had stopped fighting for acceptance. I'd stopped shrinking myself to fit someone else's story. This was my legacy. Not a medal, not a story for someone else's toast, but the loyalty, respect, and strength I left behind in the people I'd led. As the ceremony ended, a young officer approached me. I hope I can lead the way you do someday. I smiled, thinking of every struggle, every lonely night, every silent victory. You already do, I told her. Just never let anyone else write your story. Washington, D.C. in spring is a city caught between tradition and ambition, cherry blossoms, marble monuments, and the constant hum of government urgency. I'd expected to feel lost here, swallowed by the sheer size and importance of it all. But instead, I found something I'd never had before, a sense of belonging that didn't depend on where I came from, only on what I could do. My work at Cyber Command was intense, demanding, and, for the first time in my career, almost entirely collaborative. Each day brought new challenges, briefings with the Joint Chiefs, late-night alerts, red team exercises that felt more real than any field op. My colleagues were the best in the world, civilian analysts with multiple PhDs, cryptographers who spoke in riddles, tech wizards who could code a firewall in their sleep. For once, no one asked about my family. No one cared whether I was married, whether I'd ever have children, or why I worked so many hours. We judged each other on our skill, on the clarity of our thinking, and on our ability to keep calm when the world outside threatened to tilt into chaos. Here, my intensity wasn't a liability. It was required. I started to feel, really feel, that this was where I belonged. Not just in uniform, not just behind a title, but in a team that recognized my strengths and needed what I had to offer. A different kind of family. The bonds I formed in DC were fast and deep. There was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Green, a former Marine who'd gone through the same struggle for respect in a changing army. There was Hannah, a civilian from the NSA who never lost her sense of humor, even after a 36-hour cyber incident response. There was Alex, not my brother-in-law but a new friend, an Air Force major with a penchant for practical jokes and a deep understanding of how to build a team from scratch. We spent long hours in the war room, tracking digital threats and launching counteroffensives that would never make the evening news. There were midnight takeout runs, birthday celebrations over cold pizza, and more than one quiet conversation in the hallway about life, purpose, and what it meant to serve. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, we gathered on the roof of our building, paper cups of coffee in hand, to watch the city lights shimmer. Marcus turned to me and said, "You know, you're the glue here. No matter how bad it gets, everyone looks to you to keep it together." I shook my head. "I'm just doing my job." Hannah smiled. "That's what makes you good at it." For the first time, I didn't deflect the compliment. I accepted it. Legacy, redefined. I started to realize that legacy wasn't something you inherited. It was something you built, one relationship at a time. It was the way people remembered you after you left the room, the lessons you passed on without ever writing them down. Back home, things had settled into a quiet new normal. Mom called every other Sunday. Our conversations were lighter now, stories about Julia's growing family, Dad's adventures in amateur woodworking, small pieces of news from my hometown. Dad never talked about the army anymore, and I didn't feel the urge to fill the silence with explanations. Sometimes he'd send a news clipping or a book about military history, with a scribbled note, "I thought you'd find this interesting." It wasn't affection in the traditional sense, but it was his way of staying connected. Julia and Alex sent photos of their kids, little ones in toy helmets and camo pajamas, waving tiny American flags. "They want to be just like Aunt Sam," Julia wrote once. For the first time, the idea didn't sting. It made me smile. An unexpected visitor. Late one night, As I finished prepping for a classified briefing, my office phone rang, a secure line. It was Colonel Avery, my old brigade commander. "Williams," he said, "you have a minute?" "Always, sir." He was in DC for meetings and wanted to grab coffee. We met at a tiny shop near the Potomac, surrounded by lobbyists and staffers in dark suits. But for a moment, it felt like being back at Fort Carson. 2 soldiers, not ranks, just people. "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "What you did back there, at the ceremony, but more than that, every day, you changed things. For your soldiers. For the people who come after you." I was surprised, but grateful. "Thank you, sir. I just tried to do the job right." He nodded. "That's the trick, isn't it? Lead so the right people want to follow." We talked about old friends, new assignments, the Army's constant evolution. Before he left, he shook my hand and said, "And never let anyone else define what success looks like for you, Williams. You already know." At peace. Life in DC was busy, sometimes overwhelming, but never lonely. I realized that, slowly but surely, I'd stopped trying to prove myself. I'd learned to draw boundaries between my past and present, between what I owed my family and what I owed myself. I made time for things I'd neglected: long runs along the mall, weekends at the art museum, volunteering at a local school's STEM club. The city was full of possibility, and for the first time, I felt free to choose my own direction. Looking back, I saw how every struggle, every slight, every quiet victory had shaped me. The hard edges had made me resilient. The moments of kindness, whether from a teammate, a commander, or a new friend, had reminded me that strength didn't mean isolation. It meant showing up, every day, with integrity and heart. A year passed. My days in DC became routine in the way only high-stakes work ever can. I'd wake before dawn, slip into my uniform, and ride the metro while reading intelligence briefs. Each day brought new cyber threats, new missions, new chances to prove, if only to myself, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Promotion brought its own challenges and rewards. I was trusted with more, asked for advice by junior officers, invited to speak on panels about the future of military leadership. Sometimes I caught myself in the mirrored walls of Pentagon corridors and almost didn't recognize the confident woman looking back. I carried myself taller, laughed a little easier, and, most importantly, I'd stopped shrinking to fit anyone else's expectations. My apartment was simple, decorated with mementos from my career, photos of my soldiers at Fort Carson, the Legion of Merit, a shadow box of challenge coins, and, tucked in a corner, a framed group photo from Family Day. The caption read, "We see you." It was a gift from Lieutenant Evans, proof that, in the ways that mattered, I had always been seen. An unfinished conversation. One late Friday, my secure email pinged. The sender surprised me. "George Williams. Saw your name on a panel about military women and cyber leadership. Your mother says you did a good job. You've come a long way. Dad." I stared at the message for a moment. The old ache, the urge to reply, to ask for more, was gone. I knew he was proud, in his way. I'd stopped wishing for the perfect words. Instead, I typed back, "Thanks, Dad. Hope the tomatoes survived the frost this year." That was enough. Sometimes, peace is accepting that some relationships will always be a little incomplete, but still worth keeping. The Army's gift. If family is what you build, then mine stretched far and wide. Evans wrote from Fort Carson about his new squad of fresh-faced second lieutenants. Miller sent photos of his newborn daughter, named Sam. Cruz mailed a hand-carved wooden coin rack from my new office. Even Hanner from DC messaged late at night to vent about the quirks of government IT contracts. My tribe grew, each member a testament to the kind of leader I'd become. Not perfect, never that, but steady, fair, and never too proud to listen. I realized, over and over, that my real legacy would live in these stories, a team that stood a little taller because I'd stood up for them first. Sometimes, I'd think about Julia's kids, their faces lighting up on video calls, waving at Aunt Sam. Maybe someday, they'd understand what it means to serve. Maybe not. Either way, I hoped I'd shown them, shown everyone, that success isn't about medals or applause. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, and building something bigger than yourself. The quiet endings. The years of longing for acceptance, of trying to impress my father or outshine my sister, faded into memory. Our family, too, changed. Dad mellowed, Mum stopped asking about when I'd settle down. Julia and I became closer, sisters again, not rivals. Holidays were still awkward, but now I could smile at the imperfections. At Thanksgiving, Dad tried a new grace. We're lucky, you know. Lucky to have a family, lucky to have each other, even if we don't always say it right. He looked at me, eyes softer. And lucky for second chances. We all raised our glasses. For the first time, I didn't feel on the outside looking in. I felt whole. A new tradition. My last memory of Fort Carson was on a windswept parade field, handing the battalion guidon, the unit's flag, to the officer I'd mentored for 2 years. He saluted, proud and nervous. "You'll do fine," I whispered. "Just listen to your people. That's the whole secret." As I walked away, the flag snapped in the wind behind me, a reminder that we are all just caretakers, passing something on to those who come next. The story I own. Sometimes, late at night, I'd look out over the city lights of Washington, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, and let myself remember the road behind. All the battles, all the doubts, all the quiet victories. They belonged to me, not to the old stories told at parties, not to the family I'd never quite fit into, but to me. I understood, finally, that approval was never the prize. It was the journey itself, the courage to keep going, the willingness to grow, the grace to forgive, and the wisdom to know when you've already won. I'd learned to take up space. I'd learned to lead. Most of all, I'd learned to belong, to myself, to my calling, and to the future I was building, one soldier, one mission, one day at a time. If you ever find yourself fighting for recognition from people who refuse to see you, remember this: your value isn't in their stories. It's in the lives you change, the people you lift up, and the legacy you build quietly, every single day. That's the story I own. And that's more than enough.